Hey friends, this is Julie Tillman. Welcome, welcome. Today we're going to be making a gorgeous 3D card using the Storybook Royalty A2 card fronts from the July Not Too Shabby release. And this pack is just full of cute little princesses. I only have a sampling here in my box of the month, but the full pack is absolutely beautiful. I fell in love with this specific princess and originally planned to make a standard flat card with her. I glued her to my card base, added some borders, and then decided I really didn't like those borders. When I tried to peel them off, they took a chunk of the background design with them. And while I love a rustic distressed background, I just wasn't going for that with this card, and I really wanted this princess to shine. So I'm pivoting, and we're going to make a shadow box card, or at least I think that's what it was called when I learned how to do this many years ago. It's the perfect way to save a ruined background and turn it into a stunning dimensional masterpiece. So to create a shadow box card, you need a standard card base with your focal image already glued to the card front. Since mine is already glued down, we are ready for the shadow box frame. So I'm taking a piece of coordinating cardstock cut to 5.5 inches by 6.25 inches. And the reason we use the 6.25 inches is because a standard card width is 4.25 inches, and we're going to have an inch border on each side to do our accordion. So with your cardstock on your scoreboard at the 6.25 inch side, score at 1/2 inch and 1 inch, and then rotate your cardstock 180 degrees and score again at 1/2 inch and 1 inch on the opposite side. Now we're going to do our accordion folds. So flip the cardstock over. On the first side, fold back on the 1 inch score line, and then fold forward on the 1/2 inch score line. And then we're going to repeat this on the opposite side. Fold back, then fold forward. And when you're folding these, you want to make sure you take your time lining things up. The straighter you get these folded edges, the easier it will be to align everything perfectly when we assemble the card. So give those folds a really nice crisp burnish with your bone folder. So once this is pressed down, the accordion frame collapses perfectly to 4.25 by 5.5 inches, which matches our card base exactly. And now we're going to take that folded card base and put it down on the desk, and then we're going to place our princess card base on top just to get an idea of where we want our die to be. I'll place the die right over our princess, making sure her face is perfectly centered and that none of that ripped white cardstock on the edges will show through that window. And since we don't want the sides of our accordion base to show through, we want to at least leave a 1/2 inch margin from that left side of the card for our die cut. Once I have the die positioned exactly where I want it, I'm going to take a pencil and lightly trace a small mark along the inside curve of the die onto the blue cardstock. This pencil line will be our guide, so we know exactly where to tape down our die after we finish our stamping. So before we cut out our window, we want to stamp and emboss our sentiment at the bottom of this frame. I'm using the sentiment "Every Fairy Tale Starts with a Story" from the 6x8 stamp set in the box of the month. And I'm going to bring in a stamp positioner to make sure everything is perfectly aligned. When aligning this specific stamp, use that middle line of text that starts with A to align parallel with the bottom edge of your cardstock, and that will keep the entire sentiment looking perfectly straight. Sometimes those cursive writings make it kind of hard to figure out how it's going to read straight. So once positioned, we're going to prep the cardstock with an anti-static tool to prevent the stray powder from sticking. And then I'm using VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink to stamp my sentiment. Even though we're embossing in white, you can use any dark pigment ink under an opaque embossing powder. I love VersaFine Clear because it gives an incredibly crisp, detailed image and stays wet long enough to emboss. Sometimes standard watermark inks can be a bit too thick, which can distort the fine text once the powder melts. So I really like to use the black ink for embossing in white for sentiments. So once we have that stamped down, we're going to pour our white embossing powder over the stamped sentiment, tap off the excess, and clean up any stray specks. Now we're going to melt the embossing powder with our heat tool, and my standard heat tool recently stopped working, so today I'm using a Ranger heated tool. It's actually a low temp drying tool rather than a high heat embossing gun, but with a little patience you can make almost anything work. Kind of reminds me of my college days. My roommate and I were young, broke crafters with no embossing tools, so we actually used our kitchen toaster to heat emboss our cards. It took some serious finesse and a lot of patience, but it did work. So if you're ever without the perfect tool, just get creative. To add some subtle texture and interest to our frame, we're going to stamp a tone-on-tone background here. I'm using the gorgeous cherry blossom background stamp from Not Too Shabby. It's a classic 6x6 stamp and one of my absolute favorites. I just love those cherry blossoms. I'm stamping with peacock ink directly onto a peacock cardstock. And because tone-on-tone stamping can sometimes fade into the background as the ink dries, I'm going to ink it up and stamp it a couple times to make sure those details are really nice and dark. Don't worry if the background stamp overlaps your white embossed sentiment and you get some ink on it. Once the ink is down, just take a dry cloth or a slightly damp alcohol wipe and gently dab the embossed text. Because the embossing is slick plastic, it resists the ink and you can wipe it right off, leaving your white sentiment perfectly clean and bright. I'm using a small tabletop die cut machine, so I'm going to fold those accordion sides inward so the paper fits through the rollers. And I'm also going to add just a piece of white copy paper over the die so that if that ink is still a little wet, it won't transfer to my embossing plate. And once that is die cut, we're going to add a little magic with some white splatters to protect the sentiment from getting covered by the splatters. I really want it to be legible, so I'm just going to put some little small pieces of mint tape over that to cover it up before I bring in that splat box to keep my workspace clean. And then I'm going to take my white bleed proof ink and I'm going to add a little bit to an acrylic block and add just a spritz of water. And then I'm going to take a fan brush and load that up with some of the watered down bleed proof ink, and I will tap that gently over the frame, rotating my splat box as I go so that the splatters fall in different directions. This kind of gives it a much more organic, natural look. If the ink is a little too thick, just add a tiny drop of water to your brush to get those nice fine splatters. Once you're happy with the coverage, dry the panel thoroughly with your heat tool. If any blue ink or white splatters got onto your white embossed sentiment, take an alcohol wipe wrapped around your finger and very gently dab the lettering. It cleans up the embossing beautifully without warping the cardstock. So once your sentiment looks how you want it, flip your frame over to the back side and we will start assembling the 3D shadow box. We're going to apply a strong double-sided tape to the outermost ½ tab on the left of the card. Just make sure that your die cut is aligned so that you have the right side. Then peel off the backing and add just a tiny squiggle of liquid glue over the tape. This gives you a few seconds of wiggle room to slide the paper into place before the adhesive grabs. And align that left edge of your frame perfectly flush with the left corner of your princess card base. I'm using a stamp positioner to help me align it. I like to start at that top corner and work my way down. That way, if things aren't cut quite evenly, I can cut off the bottom of the card. And then once we have that positioned, we want to make sure to burnish it flat. Then we're going to repeat the process on the right side. Apply score tape to the outer tab, add a touch of liquid glue, fold the frame over and press it firmly against the right edge of the card base. And when you release it, the sides will bow outward, creating a beautiful 3D window frame. It's kind of like a dome shape, but the best part is when you press it down, it can easily compress flat to fit inside a standard A2 envelope, but it pops right back up for display. So next we're going to take that circle die cut we had left over from cutting our window, and we're going to use it on the inside of the card. I will just glue this to the center of the inside card base. For the sentiment, I am going to use one of the strips that I cut with the One and Done die set. This is a die set that there is always a bonus sentiment sheet in the A2 card pack that has a bunch of these sentiments that cut perfectly with that die, and I'm using the Happily Ever After Begins Today. I just thought it coordinated really beautifully with the sentiment on the outside of the card. Okay, next I wanted to add just a few little hearts from the stamp set just as accents around the sentiment circle. And because this was a 3D card and it wasn't totally flat, that one heart on the left got a little wonky. I tried to fix it with a little water brush, and it just didn't do what I wanted it to do. So there's always a way to fix a mistake. So I am going to pull out a butterfly ephemera piece from the Enchanted Wishes collection. And I love the butterflies, so no problem there. So I'm just going to take a couple Copic markers and kind of go over that blue to match the teal in the cardstock. And then I noticed that I forgot to erase the pencil marks on the inside of my circle. So if you haven't done that already, this would be a good time to erase your lines. And then we're going to glue that little butterfly piece down over the heart, and nobody except you will ever know that that wasn't part of the original design. So that wraps up the assembly of our card, and now we'll take a look at the finished shadow box card. The dimension is so fun, and our sweet little princess looks amazing peeking out from her cherry blossom window. Off screen, I made a second version of this card to show you another option. This one is styled a bit flatter, and I used embellishments from the Enchanted Wishes collection to accent it. The front of this one reads "Bloom Where Your Story Begins," using the same layout but stamped in red. And I also added a little frame around the edges and did all those little splatters, added some sparkly enamel dots. These shadow box cards are an incredibly fun way to use your A2 card fronts, especially those sweet little princess designs. I love how they are framed in these. All the products I used today will be linked down below. If you enjoyed this tutorial, I would love it if you gave this video a thumbs up and left me a comment letting me know which version is your favorite. And I just wanted to let you know that I'll be crafting live this Monday alongside Linh and several other amazing instructors for the Autumn Greetings Retreat. We would absolutely love for you to join us, hang out, and craft along. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.